Yes, ma'am, you can start.
Good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible? Today, I will be
Yes, ma'am.
talking about, yeah, thank you. I will be talking about the management of advanced HIV disease. We all treat our patients at our ART centers, but sometimes what happens is we fail to categorize our patients. The burden of morbidity and mortality associated with HIV infection has decreased over the past decades, as we see with access to antiretroviral therapy. But nevertheless, around 1 in 3 people living with HIV present to care with advanced HIV disease. Identification of this group of patients is important because otherwise we fail to categorize our patients into those who need our urgent attention and those who can continue with the same ERT. Is my slide okay? Thank you. Now coming to the definition of the key terms. There are several terms in advanced HIV. We go through in our clinical practice, day-to-day practice, but we need to revise what are these key terms because then we can identify our patients. The source of all these key terms is according to the WHO guidelines for management of advanced HIV disease and rapid initiation of antiretroviral therapy. That is a July 2017 edition. Now, what do we exactly mean by advanced HIV disease? This is HIV, as we all know, we find in adults and adolescents and children which older than 5 years. For this group of people, advanced HIV disease is defined as patients having CD4 cell count of less than 200 or WHO stage 3 or 4 event. So, for all our patients, we need to understand that advanced HIV for adults and adolescents, depending on the laboratory criteria, will be patients having a viral load count, a CD4 count, sorry, of less than 200 or WHO stage 3 or 4. That is, the patient is not having any severe illness or the patient is not having any decreased CD4 count which needs attention. So, uh, on the other hand, advanced HIV, as we classify it, is adults and adolescents and children older than 5 years with less than 200 cell CD4 count and WHO stage 3 or 4 event. All children younger than 5 years old are categorized as advanced HIV because children, as we know, they are vulnerable to all types of opportunistic infections. They are vulnerable to poor adherence. They are dependent for their pill intake for to their caregivers. Yeah. Now, there is a misconception about advanced HIV. Some of us, we have this conception that advanced HIV means my patient has to be on ART for quite some time in the lifespan of his ART treatment. But no, advanced HIV can also be those patients who are ART naive individuals. That is, they're coming for the first time to the ART center for their medicines. If these patients have a low CD4 count of less than 200, if these patients have any opportunistic infections which falls under the WHO stage 3 or 4, this patient will also be categorized as advanced HIV. Another group is the return to care or our LFU, lost to follow-up care patients, as we know. They also are under our advanced HIV spectrum. That is, all our patients, irrespective of whether they are initiated newly on ART, whether they were on ART for quite some time, or whether they return back to care after being lost to follow up for some time, all these patients are known as can be categorized as advanced HIV. Now, there are concerns about the advanced HIV what are the concerns? Why am I talking about advanced HIV disease today? Basically, the if we take for consideration that 100 people turn up at my antiretroviral clinic on one day, perhaps all of them do not need special attention or care equally. There may be only 10 to 15% of these patients who need special attention, special care, urgent admission. So we need to categorize. Around 80% or 70% of our patients are on a continuum of care, as we call it. They have just come for the pill pickup and they will be returning back only for their routine blood tests. But for 10 to 15% of our patients who have a severity of disease, that is, they have some opportunistic infections, 10 to 15% of our patients, they have low CD4, they may be having a failing viral load. These patients need our special attention. Why special attention? Because if we do not see into their sickness, we may lose this patient. It may happen that this patient does not turn up for the subsequent visits. So, as I said, the morbidity and the mortality in the advanced HIV group of patients is very high. This is the reason this group of patients needs special attention. The mortality rates are highest during the first 4 weeks on ART. This is why, because as the patient is initiated on ART, if this patient has a high viral load or a slow CD4 less than 200 and is having stage 3 or 4 illness, that means that this patient is quite sick. He may be having cryptococcal meningitis, he may be having tuberculosis or any other sickness which categorizes this patient as stage 3 and 4. And it is very difficult often if we do not pay much attention to these patients that the patient succumbs to his illness. So the first 4 weeks on ART is very important for these advanced HIV patients. After initiation of ART, they may need hospitalization and care, which has to be taken care of. Even after the start of ART initiation, the patients may have increased mortality risk. Why? Because as we all know that immune reconstitution is a major contributor. After the initiation of ART, immune reconstitution may worsen the patient's clinical condition. So, increased risk of onward transmission is also there. A patient who is having stage 3 or 4 illness and is having advanced HIV with a low CD4 has high risks of vertical transmission and also transmission to his or her spouse or partner. That is the transmission because there's a high viremia, the onward transmission is also very high. So these are the concerns which why this is a reason or the concern why I am talking about advanced HIV disease today. As clinicians, as a nursing staff, as counselors, everyone in the ART center, we need to be aware of the advanced HIV group of patients in our ART. We need to identify who they are. We need to take a little more care about them, any investigations or inpatient admission if needed. If this little amount of care is not given for this advanced HIV, it happens very often that we lose our patients. So, coming to the next slide, as I said, that the advanced HIV disease patients are mostly seriously ill. It is important, as per the WHO guidelines, WHO also stresses on these issues that when an adult or a child walks into the antiretroviral center to pick up his pill, it is very important that at the first instance, at the first look at the patient, we can identify that the patient is seriously ill. Only if we identify the patient as seriously ill, we will be giving him special attention. So, what are the major signs that tell us as a clinician, as we all know, and also to this is also for the counselors, for the sisters, and all the staff at the ART center. And when a patient is walking into an ART center with a respiratory rate of more than 30 breaths per minute, a heart rate of more than 120 beats per minute, unable to walk unaided, that is, he needs quite some support to walk, and other clinical conditions like he has a fever, a temperature of more than 39, combined with other signs such as the headache, can also be considered as based on local epidemiology and clinical judgment. So, a patient is having tachypnea, tachycardia, he is unable to walk without support, he has a fever, along with other signs of headache or other symptoms depending on the local disease epidemiology, we need to classify or identify, as I should say rightly, a patient who is seriously ill. Similarly, a child who is seriously ill walks in with his mother, either on her lap or walks along with her, who is lethargic or unconscious, having history of recent convulsions, unable to drink or breastfeed, repeated vomiting, and other clinical conditions such as the body temperature more than 39 degrees Celsius and age-defined tachycardia or tachypnea can be considered based on the clinical judgment. So, a seriously ill child is brought to the ART center with his or her caregivers, and the child may be lethargic or unconscious, may be having convulsions or has a history of recent convulsions, unable to drink or breastfeed, he has history of repeated vomiting or is vomiting at that point of time, having fever, tachycardia, and tachypnea. Now, tachypnea and tachycardia are age defined, as we all know, because tachypnea in a child who is an infant, that is less than 30 days age, for that child, the tachypnea rate is more than 60, is considered tachypnea. And for a child of age more than 1 month and up to 12 months, the tachypnea rate is more than 50 breaths per minute. And the tachypnea rate after the age of 1 to 5 years, that is more than 1 year and less than 5 years, up to 5 years, the tachypnea rate is considered as more than 40 breaths per minute. So, a child with tachycardia, tachypnea, with all these symptoms are categorized as seriously ill child. This child needs very special attention, maybe inpatient admission, and management accordingly. Now, uh, um, a severely immunosuppressed adult is also defined as one having CD4 count less than 50 cells per cubic millimeter. As I was saying that advanced HIV, for advanced HIV, we count it as less than 200. But for a severely immunosuppressed adult, WHO defines it at less than 50 cells per cubic millimeter. As I have been telling about the advanced HIV, I have been telling about the severely immunocompromised patients. On the other side of the table is the clinically well patients. This is very important in today's scenario. We need to identify who are our clinically well patients, those who are having no active WHO clinical stage 3 or 4 illness and having a CD4 of more than 200 cells per cubic millimeter. Because clinically well, identification of these patients is also important because we can categorize that these patients can come for a short visit to the RT center. They can just pick up their pills and go home. We do not need to keep them waiting in queues, waiting for the doctor to see them because these are patients who are stable, clinically well. And so these patients, as we know that during the time of this COVID pandemic, we are trying to minimize the overcrowding at our ART centers. We are also trying to minimize the patient frequent visits at the ART centers so that they do not contaminate the disease on the way to the ART centers. So the clinically well patients, if categorized, they can be given multi-month dispensation or MMD as they call it of medicines. And by this multi-month dispensation, the frequency of visits to the ART center can be reduced as well as the crowding of the ART centers are also reduced. Now, the stable on ART, this is a coin that has been termed by WHO and NACO has also adopted this term, that is who are the stable patients, who are our stable patients on ART. Our stable patients on ART are those patients who have been receiving ART for at least 12 months or 1 year. They do not have any adverse drug reactions. They have no current illnesses which need attention. They have a good understanding of adherence and evidence of treatment success. Consecutive undetectable viral load measures are, two consecutive viral load measures are undetectable, or in the absence of viral load monitoring, their CD4 count shows a rising trend or is more than 200. Now, there is a differentiation. This slide has been taken from WHO guidelines. NACO guidelines have a slide that is almost exactly similar, except for the CD4 count. NACO states that, as per our National AIDS Control Organization of India, NACO states that it is exceeding more than 350, then we call our patients as stable and on ART. So, as I said, that identifying our stable patients is also very important for us to continue them on treatment, because our stable patients are those patients who can be given multi-month dispensation of ART. They are our patients who understand the importance of ART, who have no current illnesses. They understand the importance of adherence, and hence these patients are doing well, as we all often write in our green cards that the patient is doing well. So these are our group of patients who are doing well. They can be given multi-month dispensation of ART, and these are the patients who are who can be relied on that after giving 3 months of drug, they will come back to us with proper consumption of these drugs. Other two terms that have been coined, as we all know, is the treatment failure and the viral suppression. Treatment failure, as we know it, is when the consecutive viral load tests are more than 1000 HIV copies per ml. And viral suppression is referring to a viral load below the detection threshold using viral assays less than 1000 HIV RNA copies. Now, here I would like to clarify something. Often we find that a patient is coined as having treatment failure only after doing one viral load count. But there is a confusion regarding this. WHO and NACO, they both define treatment failure as two consecutive viral load tests at a gap of 3 months, and during these 3 months of interval, there should be step-up counseling for the patient by the counselors. This step up in that is strict step up counseling will help to identify what are the fallacies in adherence. It will help us to identify what are the other drug interactions which may be hampering the effectivity of the ART drugs, and these and other social issues that may be hampering the ART intake. So these 3 months of step up counseling is very important for best efficacy of the ART. And only after 3 months of step up counseling and almost more than 95%, no, and almost 100% or expected more than 95% of adherence, only then we will go for the repeat viral test at 3 months of time. And after two viral loads which are showing failure, we will define that the patient is having treatment failure. Now, the next slide is any person who has signs of being seriously ill should be referred to the appropriate higher level facility for management. Often we find that we ask this patient to go home with some advice for some tests, but a patient having fever, headache, having signs of jaundice, or having signs of meningeal irritations, other than headache like convulsions, vomiting, these patients cannot be sent home just like that. We have to arrange for some facility where this patient, a tertiary care center preferably, where this patient can be admitted. Otherwise, what happens is there are high chances that we may lose this patient. Now, there are other terms that we need to define when going through our treatment protocols. That is prophylaxis and treatment. There is a difference between prophylaxis and treatment. Prophylaxis aims to avoid either the first occurrence of infections, that is the primary prophylaxis, or their recurrence as the secondary prophylaxis or maintenance. So, the primary prophylaxis is when we give our CPT, for example, when we give our Septrin tablet or the CPT as we call it, for the prevention of toxoplasmosis, for the prevention of other opportunistic infections. That is called the first occurrence of infection or the primary prophylaxis. When we give the same tablet Septrin as a continuum after the patient has had toxoplasmosis or after the patient has had PCP or pneumocystis jirovecii pneumonia, then this is called secondary prophylaxis. That is, this patient was given the drug after the occurrence of the disease. So now we know that prophylaxis is basically two types. One is the primary prophylaxis, when we give the patient the drug even before any signs and symptoms of the disease has occurred. And the secondary prophylaxis is after the disease has been cured The patient is given a continuum of the same drug for prevention of recurrence of the disease. Now, coming to the preemptive therapy. Preemptive therapy is, there are two terms basically. One is the preemptive therapy, another is the presumptive therapy. Preemptive therapy is an alternative strategy to prophylaxis that aims to prevent progression to disease after infection has occurred. Now, preemptive is a very sensitive term to be coined. Like, basically, a patient has the infection or the organism in his body, but the patient does not have any signs and symptoms to say that the patient is diseased. This is a preemptive therapy. For example, the term preemptive is used to describe treating people who are positive for cryptococcal antigen, since by the time cryptococcal antigen is positive in the blood, disease and dissemination are considered significant even if they are not clinically apparent. That is, example, preemptive, a patient walks into our ART center, a patient has CD4 less than 100, as a strategy to identify or screen low CD4 patients, we do a cryptococcal antigen test, and this cryptococcal antigen test turns out to be positive. This patient does not have any signs of cryptococcal disease, no headache, no fever, no confusion, nothing. But for just for this report that is the cryptococcal antigen is positive, we treat this patient with oral fluconazole. This is a preemptive treatment. That is, the patient has the organism in his body, the patient has the chances of developing frank disease in the next 2 or 3 months. But even before the disease has occurred, we treat the disease, we treat the organism, sorry, and we prevent the occurrence of the disease and the dissemination. And next comes the presumptive treatment. Presumptive treatment, as we all physicians know, is the empirical treatment, as we all call it. It is exclusively based on the clinical suspicion and relying on the clinical judgment. Presumptive treatment is like when we treat a patient without laboratory, it can be of two types basically: a treatment without laboratory diagnosis and a treatment based on a pre specified clinical rule. Presumptive treatment is reserved for severely ill people in settings where laboratory investigations are not available. Suppose a doctor is placed at a very remote ART center where at that point of time CBNAT or chest X-ray are not available. But he has a patient who is coming to him with cough, fever, significant weight loss, and significant amount of night sweats. So this patient is already giving all the clinical symptoms of tuberculosis. But without the availability of the CBNAT test or without the availability of the chest X-ray, what does the physician do? He starts the patient on empirical treatment. That is, he starts the patient on TB ATD, anti-tubercular drug, uh, presuming that is the patient has tuberculosis. Possibly after auscultation, the patient, the doctor finds that the patient is having cough with crepitations or rhonchi and altered breath sounds. So this is presumptive treatment without laboratory diagnosis. Often we have patients who are having intra-abdominal lymph nodes, retroperitoneal lymph nodes with fever. These patients are not are very common, not very uncommon at our ART centers. A patient has lymph node pre-aortic, post-aortic, retroperitoneal, and these lymph nodes and with a typical history of fever. But sometimes what happens is we do not have those invasive facilities to do a intra-abdominal lymph node biopsy aspiration. So what the clinician does, okay, the patient has fever and patient the ultrasound tells us that there are lots of lymph nodes in his abdomen. So we tell that this patient start this patient on presumptive treatment of tuberculosis, and accordingly the outcome is measured at 2 weeks, 4 weeks and 6 weeks to see whether the patient is doing well, whether there is the fever has gone away or not. By all these methods, presumptive treatment or empirical treatment is given. There is another presumptive treatment that is given with a pre-specified clinical rule. That is like when we give cotrimoxazole. We give cotrimoxazole when we give a patient has having some signs of respiratory distress, having a very low CD4, we start the patient on cotrimoxazole. That is basically we know that this patient may be having PCP. We have not gone for any tests. At the same time, the patient does not have that much of symptoms, but we know that a specific clinical rule is there, the established rule is there, that is patient with a very low CD4 may be having PCP and the patient has mild respiratory distress. Now, there are components of advanced HIV disease management where we look for the danger signs. As I've already said in my previous slide, that we need to identify who are our sick patients, both adults and the children. Now, the components of advanced HIV disease, as per the components, we identify fever with headache, respiratory rate, that is tachypnea, tachycardia or increased heart rate, unable to walk unaided, that is the patient does not walk into our center, he is brought by a stretcher or with the help of his relatives, is confused or seizures. Here also there has to be added that he is having recurrent vomiting. These are the danger signs. These mandate that get we arrange this patient to be admitted. This patients need urgent special care. If these signs and symptoms are present, then we refer the patient to appropriate higher level facility or experts for management. We cannot lose time because this patient is already very sick. And if the danger signs are not there, then we will go for the ADM package of care, that is Advanced Disease Management Package of Care. I have in my subsequent slide, I will show this package of care slide. This package of care basically aims to target screening, that is, the screening for tuberculosis, screening for cryptococcal meningitis, checking for ART adherence. This package of care components are in my next slide. This one. This is the components of the package of care. Here, what we aim to do is, okay, my patient does not have the signs of being very sick, so the patient does not have the need for admission, but my patient is having very low CD4. So in that case, or I suspect that my patient is having a stage 3 or 4 illness. Here, if my patient does not have a very high temperature, tachypnea, tachycardia, even then, if my patient is having low CD4 or declining trend of CD4, if my patient is having high viremia, or I suspect that my patient is having any stage 3 or 4 illness, then what I have to do is I have to screen my patient. I have to screen him for active TB, I have to screen him for cryptococcal antigen, I have to screen him for other diseases as well. At the same time, I have to see that my patient is he or she getting CPT or prophylaxis with cotrimoxazole. I have to start him or her on rapid initiation of ART, except for few grade 4 opportunistic infections, and also adherence support needs to be given. These are the main components of advanced HIV care, as this has been adopted by also NACO and WHO, mentions it in its guidelines. Now, for those with advanced HIV disease, more intensive follow-up and a package of interventions could reduce morbidity and mortality in this vulnerable group. So why am I talking about the screening for cotrimoxazole prophylaxis, rapid initiation of ART and adherence support? This is because I want to reduce the morbidity and the mortality in this vulnerable group. We have to understand that this group is a vulnerable group. They have to be categorized when they turn up at the ART centers, and this group cannot be evaluated just like any other patient. They need special attention and screening. Now, coming to the chemoprophylaxis under NACP, uh, we all know that the chemoprophylaxis is mainly by cotrimoxazole, INH, and fluconazole in the NACO program. The cotrimoxazole primary prophylaxis is given. This is prevents pneumocystis jirovecii pneumonia. Cotrimoxazole is also given for secondary prophylaxis for PCP. Now, INH, we know that it is given for the prevention of latent TB conversion to active TB. INH, a 6-month course, has been almost completed at most of the centers. INH is also a part of the ATD treatment, and it is also a part of the secondary prophylaxis where it prevents the recurrence of TB in those patients where a patient already has a history of TB, has received ATD, and after the completion of the 6-month ATD course, this patient is started on INH again. This is called the secondary prophylaxis where the INH prevents the recurrence of TB. And fluconazole, we all know that it prevents the recurrence of cryptococcal infection. This is given as secondary prophylaxis. In our NACO program, we do not give fluconazole as primary prophylaxis. We give it as our secondary prophylaxis. Fluconazole as secondary prophylaxis is given after the patient recovers from cryptococcal infection and to prevent the recurrence and until the CD4 goes above 200, this fluconazole is continued. Now, coming to the prophylactic, sorry, cotrimoxazole as a prophylaxis in adults. We know that cotrimoxazole is effective in preventing PCP or the pneumocystis jirovecii pneumonia, as we now call it. The cotrimoxazole combination is a tablet of combining sulfamethoxazole and trimethoprim. That is 800 milligram of sulfamethoxazole and trimethoprim is 160 milligram once daily. This cotrimoxazole, why we give it as both primary and secondary prophylaxis? It helps in the prevention of toxoplasmosis, certain bacterial pneumonias, nocardiosis, and enteric pathogens. Here we are talking about the primary prophylaxis. It also prevents, that is, the cotrimoxazole is preventing PCP, toxoplasmosis, certain bacterial pneumonias, nocardiosis, enteric pathogens like isosporiasis, and also not to mention it helps us to protect against malaria also. Cotrimoxazole prophylaxis in adults and adolescents. Now, the NACO slide says similarly, primary prophylaxis is given for patients with less than 350 CD4 or who has a high CD4 but with WHO stage 3 or 4 illness. Commencing secondary prophylaxis is for patients who have completed successful treatment for PCP until CD4 is more than 350. And the timing, the initiation of cotrimoxazole in relation to ART. Initially, we start cotrimoxazole in all our pre-RT patients. After 5 or 7 days of tolerating cotrimoxazole, we start our patients on ART on the antiretroviral triple regimen. And for this 5 to 7 days, when the patient is on CPT or cotrimoxazole, the patient's counseling for ART and the preparedness counseling is done. Now, leading causes of sorry. Now, the opportunistic infections. The cotrimoxazole prevention, that is, all patients with the clinical stage 3 and 4 and those with the CD4 less than 350 cubic millimeter. So, how do we go through the screening procedures? All the screening has to be done for TB. We know the 4 symptom tool of what we do at our ART centers for sputum, cough, weight loss, and night sweats. And PLHIV who do not have TB need to be started on INH preventive therapy in addition to ART. Like if the 4S symptoms tool is negative, then we start our patients on INH preventive therapy. But for that, we need to exclude that the patient does not have our any 4 symptoms. ART should not be started in the presence of severe form of active opportunistic infections. Here, there is an important time gap that we need to see for ATD, like for a tuberculosis, a gap of 2 weeks usually. For any meningeal infection, that is cryptococcal or tubercular meningitis, we usually go for a higher, that is at least 6 weeks of gap between the ART and the OI treatment. Also for PCP, it's 4 to 6 weeks minimum. So what happens is basically if we start the ART very fast and without a significant gap from the OI treatment, start of the OI treatment, there are chances that the patient will have developed in immune reconstitution or iris, and the patient's clinical condition will deteriorate. In general, opportunistic infections should be treated or stabilized before commencing ART. As I said, opportunistic infections should be at least stabilized. If not, the full treatment is not possible always, but it should be stabilized before commencing ART. And Mycobacterium avium complex and progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy are the only exception where the ART and the opportunistic infection can go side by side, because it has been seen that with the MAC complex, what happens is the ART helps to improve the clinical condition. And also for progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy, where we do not have any specific treatment as such, only the antiretroviral treatment helps to improve the patient's condition. Now, coming to the next slide, leading causes of mortality among adults with advanced HIV disease. As we as I have said already, advanced HIV disease patients globally are more susceptible to opportunistic severe infections, as we know, because they are already categorized as stage 3 or 4 illnesses. They have been seen to have the most common infections are tuberculosis, severe bacterial infections like pneumonia, meningitis, cryptococcal meningitis, toxoplasmosis, Pneumocystis jirovecii, pneumonia, or PCP as we used to call it. Among children, the common opportunistic infections seen in advanced HIV are tuberculosis, severe bacterial infections, Pneumocystis jirovecii, pneumonia, diarrheal diseases, malnutrition, and wasting also are the leading causes of death in advanced HIV disease in children. So I will just elaborate the epidemiology. Like I have been telling that these are the leading causes of death and morbidity in advanced HIV. These next few slides, I will elaborate on what is exactly the pattern of morbidity and mortality worldwide. TB is the leading cause of morbidity and mortality among people living with HIV, accounting for one third of the estimated 1.1 million people dying from AIDS related causes globally in 2015 data, with most of these TB associated deaths occurring among men. I have given the references from where which has been taken. TB also remains a leading cause of HIV associated hospitalization among adults and children living with HIV worldwide. So now we understand what is why repeatedly NACO and all our guidelines keep telling us about screening for tuberculosis, for screening the 4S presumptive symptoms, for going through the CB-NAT, for chest X-ray, and all the presumptive tests which can exclude tuberculosis, because it is one of the most highly accountable diseases which cause morbidity and mortality in HIV patients. Next comes severe bacterial infections. People with advanced HIV disease frequently have severe bacterial infections, including bloodstream, respiratory, CNS, and GI infections. The burden of mortality and morbidity attributable to severe bacterial infection is poorly characterized, largely because appropriate diagnostic facilities are lacking. Severe bacterial infections are estimated to cause more than one third of the hospitalizations among adults and children living with HIV worldwide. So here is a problem, because what happens is the bacterial infections are often treated by local physicians. They are often treated at the medicine outpatient departments, and these are not like for our tuberculosis patients who have a proper system of notification and a proper system of counting and information surveillance. We do not have a surveillance system, a notification system for bacterial infections. Our patients who are developing infections, meningitis with the bacterial infections, having lung infections, having other types of infections with bacteria get unnoticed and the counts are not measured. It is epidemiologically not possible to count these cases because they are treated at most of the outpatient departments or at the private physician's chamber with antibiotics, broad spectrum antibiotics, and these are not notified. So these CNS infections and GI infections are uncountable, and though they are and they contribute to a large burden of the disease, but they remain unestimated as such. Now, coming to the cryptococcal meningitis, the incidence of cryptococcal meningitis remains substantial despite the scale up of ART. A recent review estimated that there were over 2 lakh incidents of cryptococcal meningitis cases globally in 2014, with 73% of the cases occurring in sub Saharan Africa. The annual global deaths from cryptococcal meningitis were estimated to be more than 1,81,000. So we can understand that the patients who are having cryptococcal disease and who the high mortality is a great concern. So these advanced HIV patients who are having a low CD4, who are having the advanced HIV warning signs of fever, headache, tachycardia, tachypnea, they need to be looked into, because the mortality from cryptococcal meningitis, one of the major offenders of these morbidity and mortality, is the mortality is very high. And the cryptococcal meningitis is a leading cause of mortality among the hospitalized adults living with HIV, accounting for 15 to 20% of adult deaths, but is less common among children living with HIV. So, as we know, the great toll of death, the great toll of morbidity is very high. So, this cannot be overlooked at all. Pneumocystis jirovecii pneumonia is a leading cause of mortality among hospitalized adults and children living with HIV. This is an infection which is usually presumptively treated, because before going for confirmed laboratory test, usually we go for presumptive diagnosis, and the patients are treated with cotrimoxazole with very, very good outcome. So, treating PCP or PJP as we call it cannot be neglected. If we have an advanced HIV patient who is having symptoms of dyspnea or respiratory distress, tachycardia or tachypnea, we will always give him prophylactically the treatment for PCP, as the mortality in these patients is very high, especially with children. The global burden of morbidity and mortality attributable to PCP or PJP is poorly characterized, because appropriate diagnostic facilities are lacking in most settings. It is difficult or time consuming to establish a laboratory diagnostic confirmatory test. So, PCP is mostly treated empirically. This highlights the need for more accurate and feasible diagnostic approaches and improved access to cotrimoxazole and ART. This is the WHO has this is for that opinion has been forwarded by WHO, that for diagnosing, for accurate approach to PCP treatment, we need more diagnostic facilities. And also CPT and availability of CPT. Sometimes the Septron is not available at the ART centers, and neither it is available very frequently in the markets. So the availability of CPT is also very important in and around our ART centers. Coming to toxoplasmosis, another very important opportunistic infection. This is cerebral toxoplasmosis is the most frequent cause of expansive brain lesions among adults living with HIV not receiving cotrimoxazole. Uh, People with latent toxoplasmosis infection are at the risk of developing cerebral toxoplasmosis when their CD4 count falls below 200. About 15% of the hospitalized adults living with HIV dying from AIDS related illnesses die from cerebral toxoplasmosis. Ocular and pulmonary disease can also occur with or without concomitant encephalitis. So, this slide tells us the burden of toxoplasmosis in our HIV patients. So, this infection, we often have it inside us, and this infection, when our CD4 goes down below 200, that is our yeah, the patient becomes severely immunosuppressed. At that point of time, this latent toxoplasmosis infection converts into the florid cerebral infection, and the expansive brain lesions, or the SOLs, as we have seen in CT scans, they cause convulsions, they cause the compressive symptoms, and toxoplasmosis has a high fatality. Toxoplasmosis can be very easily prevented by cotrimoxazole. So, our advanced HIV patients having less than 200 really need our cotrimoxazole prophylaxis. Now, coming to cytomegalovirus infection, as we know, is a systemic viral infection that usually manifests as cytomegalovirus retinitis among severely immunocompromised people. The reported prevalence of cytomegalovirus retinitis is highest in Asia and appears to be low in Africa. And according to other studies, among children, CMV is responsible for CMV pneumonitis also, and HIV exposed infants have a high incidence of congenital cytomegalovirus. We also know, I have not mentioned in this slide, but CMV esophagitis is also quite common, not that uncommon at all. But CMV infection is very important because of retinitis, because often it happens that a low CD4 less than 200, a prophylactic medicines were not given, and our eye checkup was not done at all in the course of the patient's हाँ म्यूट तो नहीं हुआ है
Ma'am, you're audible.
okay, but from which slide was I not audible? Can you should I need to repeat it? No,
No, ma'am. You're
it's
audible
okay.
all the time. Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
okay, thank you. About the cytomegalovirus infection, this infection is very important. We often come across cases where there are patients admitted at our inpatient department. Patient is having a loss of vision, sudden acute loss of vision, and the patient loses his eyesight completely. So, screening our patients for CMV retinitis, it's not very cumbersome. We can always refer our patients who are having less than 200 CD4 or less than 100 CD4 to the ophthalmology outdoor. We can ask for just an indirect ophthalmoscopy, and the patient can be screened for cytomegalovirus infection. This is a preventable infection. We can treat it with ganciclovir, or because if it is a preventable infection, it is a negligence that we do not look into the matter, and our patient loses his or her eyesight. Now, addressing the other issues, like as I said, I'm summarizing my discussion today. The leading causes of morbidity and mortality I have discussed. Now, the individual interventions. How do I proceed? If I know that my patient is having less than 200 CD4 persistently for the last 12 months, that is, two or more values are less than 200, or has a declining trend of CD4, or if my patient is failing on his viral load, two consecutive viral loads are showing high viremia, what has to be done for my patient? Specifically, how should I proceed with this patient of mine to reduce his mortality and morbidity? What we can do is, first and foremost, I have to start my patient on CPT prophylaxis. This will prevent a lot of infections and will prevent a lot of trouble for my patient. Then I will go for TB preventive treatment. First, I will screen my patient for the forest symptoms. If I am sure that the patient does not have any symptoms of having probable tuberculosis, then I will start my patient on INH therapy. Then, if my patient has the forest symptoms, that is, he has cough, fever, weight loss, or symptoms of that is night sweats, then I will go for a gene expert test or for Mycobacterium tuberculosis. I will also go for a lateral flow urinary lipoarabinomannan. This is available nowadays and will be very soon coming into our NACO program also. This is a urine card test, a very easy test which determines whether my patient is having a presence of mycobacterium in his urine or not. It's also sensitive for rifampicin sensitivity. And the chest X-ray I will be doing for my patients who are having suggestive symptoms for TB and having a low CD4 count and are seriously ill. The cryptococcal antigen screening will be done. It can be done by the lattice agglutination test or by the lateral flow assay, which is a card test. That this LFA is a card test. It's a very easy test, useful test, which screens my patient, and I can identify who is having a cryptococcal antigenemia. And this test is very important for all my patients who are having a CD4 less than 100, especially important for them. A preemptive antifungal treatment for those with positive blood cryptococcal antigen. I'm coming to this again in my next slide. So what has to be done is I need to give my patient CPT, I need to give him IPT, I need to give start him on a screening for tuberculosis, whether be it a chest X-ray, whether be it a LF LAM test or a gene expert test. I have to start him on a preemptive antifungal treatment after doing a cryptococcal screening test. Now, this is an algorithm. As I said in my previous slide, I can go back to it once. Excuse me. Here, I said that what are the components of the advanced disease management. And in the green box on the right hand side, I said follow the algorithm to offer ADM package of care, that is steps 1 to 5. Now, I elaborate those 1 to 5 steps of package in this chart. This is a NACO chart. This has been offered. This training has been provided to all the medical officers uh, under the NACO umbrella, and the training has already been done. I hope everyone is acquainted with this slide. There are 5 steps of screening and management for all our advanced HIV patients. These 5 steps are: step 1, screening for TB; step 2, screening for meningitis; step 3, CPT prophylaxis; step 4, starting ART as soon as possible; and step 5 is adherence and adherence counseling. Step 1 is the TB treatment. If the TB treatment symptoms are present, go for the TB tests, CBNAT, X-ray, USG, whatever. If the patient is positive for any of the tests, go for the ATD treatment. If the patient does not have any TB symptoms, go for IPT for 6 months. Again, the step 2 is assess for meningitis. The signs of meningitis typically headache, confusion, neck pain. If the symptoms are positive for CSF crag, sorry, if the symptoms are positive for serum crag, then the patient is having meningitis, that is cryptococcal meningitis. Then what we will be doing is we will also do the CSF crag. After the CSF crag test, we will admit the patient and start him on treatment for cryptococcal meningitis. Now, there are patients who will test for the cryptococcal meningitis, but they do not have any symptoms of meningitis because the test was just done as a preventive or programmatic issue. For these patients where the cryptococcal meningitis symptoms are not there, but the cryptococcal test is positive, for these patients we will do a CSF study again. If the CSF crag is also positive, we ask the patient to get admitted and go for a proper amphotericin B, that is liposomal amphotericin B and fluconazole therapy. But if the patient's CSF is negative and the patient does not have any meningeal signs, only the serum crag was positive, then in that case we give him a preemptive treatment with only fluconazole until the CD4 goes above 200. The step 3 for this algorithm tells us that we need to give trimoxazole prophylaxis, which I have discussed for all my patients with CD4 less than 350. Step 4 is the patient, if the patient has not been started on ART, except for that window period time gap for all the diseases like TB, cryptococcal disease, or PCP, I will start him on ART as soon as possible. Only for MAC and PML, I will start the ART and the opportunistic infection treatment at the same point of time. The step 5 is enhanced adherence counseling for OI treatment and ART with intensive follow up for minimum 12 months after ART initiation. Apart from our other patients who have a high CD4, who have only stage 1 or 2 illnesses, our advanced HIV patients need to be monitored very closely for adherence, intensive support till 12 months of ART. This is a chart which has been taken from the WHO advanced HIV guidelines. This again says the same. I think this is not very much visible, slightly hazy. For diagnosis, I am going for Gene Expert, the LF LAM for TB diagnosis, and cryptococcal antigen screening. Again, for the prophylaxis, I am going for CPT. I am going for the INH TB preventive therapy and prophylaxis with fluconazole for cryptococcal antigen. Then ART initiation, rapid ART initiation wherever feasible, and defer initiation of ART for meningitis or tubercular meningitis or cryptococcal meningitis as according to the guidelines, or PCP according to the guidelines. And last but not the least, we need to give very much tailored counseling support. This counseling support is very important. Our patients will do well and they will stay well, and their morbidity will be reduced if our counseling is very good. We have to give support for this active counseling till 12 months of ART or the first year of ART for this group of patients. I conclude my discussion today. Hope it was understandable to all of us. And for all queries related to this session, please you can email me or write to me at coestm@gmail.com. Thanking you for patient listening.
Thank you, ma'am. Participants are requested to unmute themselves if they have any questions, or they can even type in the chat box. Ma'am, I don't think there are any questions. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. There are no
Thank you,
questions
ma'am.
till
No
now.
questions.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
ma'am.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Okay. Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye, ma'am.